Cam Ranh International Port inaugurated. Impact of Trans-Pacific Partnership on Vietnam's third wave of FDI. You're with me, Linh Hương, and it's good to see you again on another episode of Bizlline, brought to you by VTV International. As usual, we start our show with several highlights in the economic scene from the past week. Cam Ranh International Port in the southern central coastal province of Khánh Hòa was inaugurated on Tuesday. President Trương Tấn Sang attended the event. Once completed, Cam Ranh International Port is expected to become the biggest port in Vietnam in terms of wharf length. The port will be capable of handling 18 ships at one time and accommodate vessels of up to 110,000 DWT. The port will be capable of receiving 185 ships per year and is designed to protect ships against severe wind and storms. The port will serve both civilian and military vessels. Cam Ranh Bay holds a strategic position in the East Sea due to its proximity to international navigation routes and Paracel and Spratly archipelagos, as well as to the oil and gas areas in the Vietnam Southeast continental shelf. The 2016 Innovation Roadshow took place on Monday in Hanoi. The event, organized by the Ministry of Science and Technology and the U.S. Mission to Vietnam, attracted around 30 representatives, including government officials, startups, and foreign investors. At the forum, American experts suggest more open policies, simplified business procedures, and technological improvement to encourage innovation. In the coming time, the Ministry of Science and Technology will complete its policies to promote startup ecosystem development. From April 15, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, will impose strict regulations on its imported char and basa fish. 23 businesses in Vietnam have been allowed to export their products to the U.S. market. Vietnam's Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries has proposed 22 additional enterprises be listed by the U.S. Domestic firms are required to proactively supervise food safety and quality, ensuring their products are qualified for export to the U.S. in terms of labeling, especially country of origin and manufacturer name and code. While produce exports continue to face difficulties in 2015, the cashew industry has posted an increase in export output and turnover. This helps to maintain Vietnam's position as the world's top cashew exporter for the 10th year in a row. The information was pointed out at a conference on the 2016 Cashew Production Report organized by the Vietnam Cashew Association last week. In 2015, cashew export turnover reached $2.5 billion, an increase of 10% as compared to 2014. The industry has continued to hold 50% of the global cashew nut trade value. Currently, Vietnam cashew exports are expanding to 80 nations across the globe, including main markets such as the United States, China, and European countries. Phu Quoc Island welcomed the arrival of the first non-stop flight from Sweden on Tuesday. The flight was made by B787 Dreamliner, operated by the TUI Nordic sister airline company, Thomson Airways. Phu Quoc Island is the newest destination for Nordic customers, with 3 arrivals this month. According to Tommy Serban, senior product manager of TUI Nordic, the airline intends to add 1 flight per week from December 2016 through the end of March 2017. With Phu Quoc's new international airport enabling direct flights from Nordic countries, TUI Nordic is on the search of hotels that will meet its customers' expectations. We have just reviewed several economic and business highlights from the past week. Up next, let's talk about the impact of the Trans-Pacific Partnership on the third wave of FDI into Vietnam in our crosstalk. At a conference on the ratification and implementation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership or TPP agreement in Vietnam last weekend, Mr. Trần Quốc Khánh, Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade, Vietnam's chief TPP negotiator, shared that all the related documents had been completed to be submitted to the government. These documents will then be reviewed and ratified by the National Assembly at some point this year. The trade pact is hoped to not only open new markets for Vietnamese products, but also new opportunities for foreign investors in Vietnam, becoming one of the strongest drivers in the third FDI into Vietnam. In today's Crosstalk, we'll learn more about the impact of the TPP on future foreign investment in Vietnam with economist Ray Marlin, a senior advisor of the collaborative research project between Vietnam and Australia named Restructuring for a More Competitive Vietnam. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
But before we talk, let's take a look at the following.
The TPP is considered the trade agreement of the 21st century. Among the pact's dozen members, Vietnam stands to be one of the biggest winners, with trade relations between Vietnam and TPP member countries expected to thrive in the future. This will help facilitate investment flows into Vietnam from both TPP member and non-member countries. Particularly non-TPP members will invest in Vietnam to take advantage of its vast tariff reductions. As for member countries, investment from Japan and the US are expected to rise sharply. Many large US corporations have expressed interest in Vietnam in anticipation of an improved investment climate.
Everyone knows that Vietnam's going to gain an advantage in garments, textiles, footwear, some of those type of things. But when we look at investment into Vietnam, we see people that want to come here and put Wi-Fi on Vietnam Airlines planes. We see people that are opening up transportation services and set up service companies, to educate young Vietnamese people, to help with the workforce, tax advisory, all types of things. And so we see TPP as just making Vietnam a better place to do business so that people across a broad range of industries are going to come and find a country that is that's more competitive and more attractive.
Another example is Australia. Currently under the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, rice imported into Australia from Vietnam is taxed at 10%. This tax will be waived under TPP commitments, opening opportunities to facilitate trade between Vietnam and Australia, among other things.
There have been commitments made that improve the market access for Australian investors, and I think we can expect to see more investment in specialty areas for Australia, such as mining, education, oil and gas related services, and infrastructure related as well, things of that nature.
According to a report by the Vietnam Institute for Economic and Policy Research, foreign direct investment is expected to increase by $13 billion post-TPP. Vietnam expects dispersed FDI to reach a record high this year after the government eased business regulations, attracting investors who seek to benefit from the trade pact.
Vietnam witnessed two waves of FDI into the country from 1991 to 1997, 2005 to 2008. With your extensive research into the country since the 1990s, could you tell us how these two waves of FDI have contributed to the country's economy?
In several ways. Obviously the investment itself, the capital, was very important because Vietnam was short of investment resources, in particular short of foreign investment resources, so that was very important. But it's more than that. Foreign investment brings with it quite often access to markets that Vietnam didn't have at the moment, so the foreign companies coming in to Vietnam would also have access to markets in their home countries and other countries, so that helped Vietnam to increase and diversify its trade base. In addition, the foreign investment helps to boost productivity and has helped to boost productivity. It brings in new technology, skills, know-how, which is very important. And then the foreign investors employ people. That's been very important in the sheer numbers of people employed, but also in terms of building up the capacity of people that they employ, and they build up know-how, and then eventually that has assisted in building up the domestic private sector.
TPP is said to be among the main drivers of the third wave of FDI into Vietnam starting from this year through 2020. What's your view on this?
Yes, but I think it's important to remember that TPP is just one part of the process. Vietnam will only sign up to TPP if the reforms that are part of the TPP are good for Vietnam. So the real, in addition to TPP, you've got Asian Economic Community, you've got the negotiations for RCEP, plus a whole lot of bilateral agreements, and not to forget the European Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. So all these factors matter, but probably even more important is the ongoing reform agenda of the government. Any of those reforms that help to break down the barriers to new business entry, to competition, to the movement of investment, trade, goods and services, all those sorts of reforms that the government has got ongoing anyway are probably more important than TPP. This being said, TPP provides another point of pressure, if you like, to get the change. It's another reason to move forward on the reform agenda.
Which sectors will receive the most FDI spurred on by the TPP, in your opinion?
It's always difficult to make predictions as you move away from a centrally planned to a market economy. The market economy, in a sense, drives what's going to happen. But if you look at past trends, you look at what's happened in other countries in the region, you see where the areas of comparative advantage are emerging. In Vietnam, it's pretty clear that manufacturing is one area where there's great potential for growth as a result of TPP. You could well imagine the electronics industry and the garments industry, the textile in particular, these sorts of industries will grow. But you could also imagine others like tourism and the retail services, property that goes with that. You would hope also that there might be some limited increase in higher value agricultural production. Some agricultural sectors may stand to lose from TPP, but there may be new opportunities for Vietnam to move into some of the higher value agricultural products, horticultural products, for instance, and also an increasing value added in the existing agricultural products here.
Now, if TPP is good for Vietnam, why did some other ASEAN member countries at a similar stage of development not join TPP?
The whole TPP process has been particularly contentious. There's particular provisions where there was concerns and high levels of political concerns. These were things like intellectual property, investor dispute resolution mechanisms, and even some of the developed countries like, they were contentious in Australia and New Zealand. I think countries like Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia facing elections, there were political reasons why they may not want to move forward at that particular time. Also, there's a whole lot of other trade agreements being negotiated as well. Those countries are all involved in negotiations with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is effectively the ASEAN Economic Community, plus 6 other countries, China, India, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. So they're negotiating that, and maybe they gave higher priority. This being said, Indonesia has already announced its intention in October, I think, to talk about participation in the TPP in the future, and Thailand and Philippines have expressed interest as well, so it could well happen in the future.
With total FDI of $44 billion as of November 2015, South Korea has become the largest foreign investor in Vietnam. An increasing number of Korean investors find Vietnam an attractive location because of the recent Vietnam-Korea Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which Vietnam is a member.
In the future, Korea will increase investment in Vietnam so that it can export more goods to TPP member countries through Vietnam. Vietnam will become Korea's strategic investment destination.
According to the Korea International Trade Association, 49% of surveyed Korean enterprises operating in 32 countries plan to develop business in Vietnam.
다시 한번
As Vietnam's GDP per capita has been on the rise, Korean companies once thought about increasing investment in labor-intensive sectors in Vietnam. However, with Vietnam now a member of the TPP, Korean companies will increase investment in these sectors, among many others.
Korean investors are present in Vietnam's electronics, retail, finance, energy and agriculture industries. Notably, in the past, Vietnam attracted only big names such as LG and Samsung. Now, smaller firms and satellite companies are coming to support these corporations and increase their exports through Vietnam. Thai investors have recognized similar opportunities from Vietnam's TPP membership, while Thai investment was seen mainly in industrial parks from the Amata Group and auto parts manufacturing from Thai Summit Group. Now more Thai companies are involved in textiles.
Most of the big garment factories in Thailand moved to have the operation here already. When we compare to export garment from Thailand comparing to Vietnam, we have at least 17% cost comparing to Vietnam. By to be joint venture with the Vietnamese manufacturer and investigator for becoming the global production to export to other countries around the world.
Thai firms, mainly in retail, food and beverage, are using the M&A route to enter Vietnam. The Thai conglomerate Singha Group bought stakes valued at $1.1 billion in subsidiaries of Masan Group, one of Vietnam's largest private companies, with business interests ranging from beer to consumer foods to banking and resources. Thai is the 10th largest investor in Vietnam and moving up the ranks quickly. So a growing number of Thai companies are moving to Vietnam through mergers and acquisitions. Korean companies are expanding their investment in Vietnam. So what should companies from non-TPP member countries be aware of in order to take advantage of Vietnam's TPP membership?
It's going to depend by sector and what areas that they're going into. When you look at Thailand, for instance, a lot of the mergers and acquisitions are in areas such as property, retail services. That probably won't be so affected by TPP and won't be a big consideration, to the same extent. In the case of China, for instance, at the moment Vietnam imports a lot of its textiles for its garment industry from China. TPP will potentially have a big impact on those imports. For Vietnam to benefit from TPP in terms of accessing the US market, for instance, it will no longer be able to import substantial amount of inputs for, textiles, for instance, for the garment industry from China. That means Vietnam will have to change its source of imports, look for countries, other TPP countries to import these textiles from, or increase the amount of textile production here. So that's one of the reasons I think there will be quite substantial increases in investment in the textile industry here. The incentives for it are going to be greater. You're already seeing this trend over the last year or two for more foreign investors to invest directly in the textile. And that's good. I mean, that's going to be the sort of thing that will increase the domestic value added of exports in the garment industry.
Vietnam is not the only AEC member to take part in the TPP. So how do you compare Vietnam's competitiveness and attractiveness as an FDI destination with countries like Singapore, Malaysia or Brunei?
Well, Singapore, Brunei and Malaysia all have much higher labour costs than Vietnam. So in many ways, Vietnam's participation will be seen as complementary to their participation. There'll be many investors in Malaysia and Singapore looking at the opportunity to benefit from Vietnam's relatively low labour costs to access some of the other the markets in the other member countries of TPP. So I think that's basically a plus. Sooner or later, Vietnam is likely to face the same competition from Indonesia and possibly Philippines and Thailand when they are likely to join TPP. And I think in terms of those markets, Vietnam has demonstrated that it does have a comparative advantage. It has been successful in particularly, say, the electronics industry, garments industry, relative to those countries. One would imagine that will continue, provided Vietnam continues to improve the enabling environment for business, the enabling environment for trade and investment, Plus continues to invest in improving human resources and infrastructure here. These areas of comparative advantage should remain.
Vietnam is gaining popularity as an FDI destination among foreign investors who want to shift their investment from China. But how is Vietnam compared to other FDI destinations around the world, such as India?
Well, I think just looking at the data, Vietnam has performed well as a percentage. FDI coming in here as a percentage of GDP has been one of the highest in Asia. You know, and that's likely to continue. Other countries like India, obviously, they have very big populations. They have a massive labour force. The education in India is not as well equitably distributed throughout the country, so you tend not to have the same basic skills among the bulk of the population. I think in terms of manufacturing, Vietnam will continue to do well. Sooner or later, you would hope that Vietnam, the wages will get higher and higher. That's part of it. And then you would want Vietnam to be less competitive at that low end, but moving into more high productive jobs and to improve living standards. But that will take time.
The TPP is expected to have a bigger impact on Vietnam's investment climate than other free trade agreements. This is because the TPP exerts heavy pressure on improving regulatory transparency and openness.
Gọi là công khai thì hiện nay có nhiều luật chúng ta, những cái đối tượng như là các doanh nghiệp trong nước cũng như các doanh nghiệp nước ngoài, các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài, người ta không tiếp cận được thông qua một cái hệ thống thông tin mở. Và các cái cổng thông tin của chính phủ, các thông tin các bộ, các địa phương cần phải nhanh chóng hơn nữa để người ta tiếp cận được các cái quy định mới nhất. Còn minh bạch thì rõ ràng là trong pháp luật chúng ta hiện nay cái hiểu giữa người mà thực hiện pháp luật và người mà phải thực hiện pháp luật là các đối tượng là doanh nghiệp, nhiều khi một vấn đề hiểu khác nhau. Do đó cho nên là cãi nhau về thuế, cãi nhau về thủ tục hải quan là do các quy định của chúng ta chưa được minh bạch.
Joining the TPP will offer Vietnam the chance to promote a market economy and accelerate economic reforms, which will contribute to a more conducive investment environment.
Một trong những yêu cầu quan trọng nhất của TPP chính là đảm bảo cái yêu cầu bình đẳng thực sự giữa doanh nghiệp trong nước và nước ngoài, doanh nghiệp nhà nước với doanh nghiệp tư nhân. Cho nên các cái đặc quyền, các cái ưu đãi, rồi những cái sự bất bình đẳng giữa doanh nghiệp nhà nước và doanh nghiệp tư nhân sẽ bị loại bỏ.
As with all reforms and economic restructuring processes, there will be winners and losers. With more FDI spurred on by the TPP, domestic companies will face greater competition and even possibly be driven out of the market.
Vì các doanh nghiệp đầu tư nước ngoài họ có công nghệ, họ có nguồn vốn và họ nắm bắt được những cái thông tin trước các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam. Do vậy mà các cái doanh nghiệp đầu tư nước ngoài nó có lợi thế hơn rất nhiều.
Now, what is your view of the current dominance of foreign invested companies over local and domestic companies in Vietnam?
That's one of the big gaps that Vietnam faces. The amount of employment, the amount of output coming from the domestic private sector remains very small compared with most of the other Asian countries, compared with most developed countries. You don't have that corporate sector that really has the scale that's often needed to innovate and to access international markets. So it's important that the government does address the barriers to the development of the domestic private sector. I think one of the things that the government's got to look at, the emergence of a domestic corporate sector, is to make sure that it doesn't provide special treatment to state enterprises or even to some foreign direct, some of the larger foreign direct investment companies. Some of those still get preferential access to things like land, capital, and even to tax concessions or access to export arrangements, etc.
You have just pointed out what the government should do to alleviate negative impacts from foreign invested companies' dominance in Vietnam's market. How about domestic companies? What should they do?
I guess the idea is continue learning. I mean, one of the great things, one of the great attributes, I think, of Vietnamese business people and people generally is this strong desire to learn. And I think, internet technology provides increasing opportunities to access information about new know-how, new skills, new technology, new market opportunities. I think all of that's happening. They're going to have to pick up some foreign language skills to improve their access. But this is happening. I think even TPP, through improving or increasing the scope for Vietnam's integration into regional production networks, will provide new opportunities. There's going to be strong incentive for some of the foreign investors to subcontract their work out to domestic firms. I think the other area is to continue or sustain the pressure on the government or dialogue with the government to improve the business enabling environment, continue to work with the government to reduce or simplify the administrative and regulatory environment for establishing and operating businesses, and also for investment and trade activities. There's still too many bottlenecks and procedures in the way of sending goods out of Vietnam. I think they've also got to push for stronger market economic institutions. This takes time. It's taken hundreds of years in developed countries, but it's going to be increasingly important here. I think it's important that you have some sort of independent competition agency so that where there are problems with monopoly power or unfair competition, that the private sector or whoever's affected can take it up and have an independent saying, adjudication by the government. And also in areas like power sector, transport sector, it's important that the regulator is not also an owner. This is the current case at the moment. In many cases we still have ministries owning state enterprises with monopoly power, and they're also the ones that are regulating the industry.
Well, Mr. Ray Mallon, thank you very much for spending your time with us in our show today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Vietnam expects foreign direct investment to rise steadily in the years to come after the government eases business regulations, luring investors seeking to benefit from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Pact. However, more needs to be done to make sure that domestic companies are not left out from these benefits. And that's all we have for this episode of Bizline. Thank you very much for being with us. You can always rewatch our program online at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. And goodbye for now from Hanoi.